Hey, hello everybody, Justin from Playing Board Games here, and I'm back with this deck tech series where I design decks for investigators that are not my usual decks that I play for these. We did Roland back in like July, so it's been a long time since we've done one of these, but I'm hoping to get back on this trend now that things have settled in the summer and all that. With Daisy Walker here. Now I have to admit something before we get into this video. I have built a lot of Daisy Walker decks. So normally with this series I can find something pretty quick for an investigator that I've built that I haven't built before. But unfortunately with Daisy, a lot of the stuff that I have tried that I wanted to cook up for this video, I've already done on this channel before. So we're here with a deck that I've never actually built for Daisy Walker. It took me a bit. Unfortunately, it's probably not like the coolest Daisy Walker deck, but I'm still excited to talk about it here today. And I'm calling it Charged Up. And you guessed it, we're going to be using cards like Book of Shadows, Call of the Beyond, and Winds of Power to keep an archaic glyphs loaded to the brim with charges. We're going to get ahead with big burst clue potential and feel like a charged up super librarian in the process. So a nice and simple deck concept here that's going to require a good chunk of expansions, as these videos usually do. If you don't have these cards, you can find substitutions in things, find things that are close. You kind of need to play Archaic Glyphs and some of the charge stuff to make this deck really pop off. And you can also look at proxying cards as well that you might be missing. This one is also notably, I'm playing with the advanced signature, so that's why I have the Read or Die here as well. The Parallel Daisy, we're not playing Parallel Daisy, this is regular Daisy, but we are using her advanced signatures. Let's take a quick look at the level 0 deck. I don't want to spend too long on this though, because that's not really where the deck really pops. Things that are important to keep in mind though with this one is that you are going to want to translate your Archaic Glyphs ASAP, because that is kind of the namesake of the deck. So dig it out, play it, translate it, and then start reaping the rewards once we get to our upgraded version of the deck, which looks a little something like this. The reason why we're playing the advanced signatures is just that I think her tote bag is so much better when you actually have that in play. It gives you 2 additional hand slots, but you can also play a tome fast each turn, which gives her an additional action, which is going to add up over time. So, yeah. The Daisy's tote bag is why we're doing that. The Necronomicon upgraded version can be a little bit spooky, but I've passed tests when I've had it in play, which has been kind of sick when that happens. So just, I think that the advanced Daisy's tote bag is definitely worth the advanced Necronomicon weakness. All right, let's dive in and start talking about cards. First up, we have our 2 charge assets that we are looking at using, refilling, and then using again. So we have the Archaic Glyphs Guiding Stones, which is, it has 3 charges, and spend a charge, investigate for every 2 points you succeed by, discover 1 additional clue at your location, and then also Divination 4, which is just going to give us some burst clues. We're going to talk about Archaic Glyphs because that's the main focus of this deck. It's a powerful and fun card that we will look at taking advantage of before Divination. While we don't have a lot of static book boosts in this deck, we make up for it with our skill cards, Perception 2 and Promise of Power, to help throw our tests into overdrive. One thing to remember is that we don't need to use Archaic Glyphs on high shroud locations to gain value. Burst clues are burst clues no matter where they came from. Instead, I would rather use Divination on our high shroud locations because we get to investigate at 7 with that. So it kind of becomes one of those things that while we could use Archaic Glyphs on higher shroud locations, Archaic Glyphs is really nice on lower shroud locations because we just want burst clues. We just want to turn our actions into tempo positive, and Archaic Glyphs is the way to do that. Refilling both of these is really fun for various reasons, and I think both of them are applicable hits depending on what cards you see and when. The next batch of cards are the cards that we have to ensure that we remain charged up. Most of them speak for themselves, so I won't spend too long on them. Book of Shadows has obvious synergy with Daisy's ability. We get 1 tome action a turn, and Book of Shadows is one of the tomes that we can do it in. Is it the best tome that we can do it in? No. But if we can refill our Archaic Glyphs over time, that is pretty sick. She can run the upgraded version, she can only run this one, but if you are filling up your archaic glyphs, like just like if you put like 3 charges on it through the course of the scenario, I think that's probably worth it, especially if those charges get you like 1 or 2 clues above your normal clue rate. Call of the Beyond works well with both archaic glyphs and divination because they both have an action ability that can be triggered off playing Call of the Beyond. Call of the Beyond is a new card from Feast of Hemlock Vale, which at this point now in this video, it's actually on an older card because it's new in terms of the expansion, but in terms of time, it's been out for a little bit in our collections. What's really nice about this card in charge assets is that it fills it to the brim, and then you also get to activate it. So you're not really spending an action to do it. And the 3 curse tokens, they're somebody else's problem. I really like this. I've played this with a lot of charge-based assets. Archaic Glyphs and Divination both sing with this card really well. Lastly, we have Winds of Power. This has synergy with Old Book of Lore, which we will touch on more in the next slide. You can just play it if you do draw it, but if you are able to draw it when you want to, you can save an action in playing it. First up, we got Research Librarian on this next batch of cards. Research Librarian has the task, the thankless task, by the way, we never thank him, has the task of digging out one of our tomes as needed. If we don't have an Old Book of Lore, that's priority 1. We're running a 1 of Old Book of Lore in this deck, and we want to dig it out when we can. Otherwise, we're going to grab Book of Shadows if charges are needed, or Grim Memoir if we're otherwise set up. Often, though, Research Librarian will just sit in our hand and take space once we are set up and Dr. Milan is in play, which we will touch on in a future slide as well. Dr. Milan, though, there's a reason why he's one of the best. Next up, we got Old Book of Lore. Old Book of Lore is an incredible card in Daisy because of her extra action for tome assets each turn. This allows us to dig for cards that we need when we need them, and can also provide assistance to our teammates. This and Astounding Revelation, which we'll also touch on in the future, go very hard together. There's a reason why Old Book of Lore for the longest time was treated as Daisy Walker's secondary signature. It is very good with her ability. Just for each turn to be able to look at the top 3 cards of your deck and choose one of them to play is a very powerful effect. Yes, we're going to have Book of Shadows, which we want to be using when we can. If we ever don't want to use Book of Shadows, though, we're going to be falling back on Old Book of Lore, and it's going to be a great time. The nice thing about Old Book of Lore, especially if we hit it early, it's going to make the rest of our game so much smoother and so much more consistent, and that is why Daisy Walker is so good and so fun to build with, because Old Book of Lore gives her such insane consistency. Last on this slide, we have Grim Memoir. This is a nice tome for Daisy. It basically turns her into Rex Murphy with draw card. It just turns your investigates into draws. If you're not using it for her ability, it's still just a fine card to have into play. I like Grim Memoir and Daisy a lot. I like Grim Memoir in a lot of investigators, but I do also really like it in Daisy. Keeping this going, we have our economy section in our deck. They all provide different shapes of economy. Dr. Milan Christopher is really obvious. He gives us a book boost, and when we successfully investigate, we gain a resource. This works really well for Book of Shadows. Astounding Revelation is nice because it's going to trigger with our Old Book of Lore, and then we can either gain 2 resources or place a secret on our Old Book of Lore, essentially giving us 2 resources, which is really nice. Burning the Midnight Oil, love this card. Just gives you money for investigating and playing the game. And then we got Thorough Inquiry, which I'm running here as a panic card draw, or a no draw perception in a pinch for archaic glyphs. It having 2 book icons is relevant for both translating the glyph, even though you only get 1 progress when you're translating it, but also when you're investigating with the glyph, another 2 book icon I think can go pretty dang hard. If it sounds like I'm going through this deck pretty quick, it's because this deck's core is actually relatively simple. This is probably the most straightforward of all these decks that we've done in this series. There's the least kind of like hooks or like plot twists when it comes to the deck and all that, so that's why I'm seems to be going pretty quick. But also because like the deck is just, it's pretty chill. You just play archaic glyphs and then you go through it. Notably, you can tutor up the level 0 archaic glyphs, but you can't tutor up the experienced version, which is why we also want to find our Old Book of Lore ASAP. I've included a 1 of Steady Handed as a cheeky little synergy with Archaic Glyphs. Because Archaic Glyph cares about every 2 points you succeed by, Steady Handed can round up awkward succeed by 1 or 3 results when investigating with the glyphs. Luckily, as I mentioned earlier, the Old Book of Lore provides such great consistency for Daisy Walker, so finding your steady-handed and playing it when you want to is really nice. Feel free to adjust. As always, consider these decks to be templates for you to change and get inspired from. I don't expect you to run these one for one, because the reality is that every deck builder is different. So if you want to change things, feel free to change things. This is kind of just like me giving you an idea and saying, hey, run with it. Do what you want to do with it. And I really like steady-handed also just for passive horror healing, because you can use it for like any one of your tests, but I do like it for its ability to round up the archaic glyphs. Last up, to round out this deck list, we got Deduction, Perception, and Promise of Power. Notably, Perception level 2. It's a very good card. The usual suspects of skill cards, I've talked about these guys a lot. Deduction gets you more clue, so when you're getting clue, you can somehow get even more clue. And then Perception and Promise of Power are here for the Glyph Investigates, but don't be afraid to use them elsewhere as needed. If you maybe need to, get a card draw, or Promise of Power for helping out a teammate or yourself for a scary Mythos card, or for some reason forced evade action, because it can happen. But while these cards are here in theory to boost up the archaic glyphs, that is not the only reason why they exist. All right, let's talk about the upgrade order. As always, adjust these to how you find the deck performs and fill gaps as needed. I feel like upgrading on a strict guideline is actually very counterintuitive to what Arkham Horror wants you to do. You need to adapt. You might not get experience to fit in all of these things like at once. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting them into chunks about like where I would focus if I was upgrading, and then you can move around in these chunks as you want, or even move things from one chunk to another. So our first upgrade, the most important, is Archaic Glyphs 0 to Archaic Glyphs 3. We want to do that as soon as we can. Then we have the Old Book of Lore 3 and the Book of Shadows, just to make our deck more consistent and to help the archaic glyphs really function. And then we have our upgrading our divinations from our Delve 2 Deeps once we've got an experience out of Delve 2 Deeps, usually around scenario 4 or 5 at the latest. Like scenario 4 is probably like my last time I want to use this Delve 2 Deep. You could even do it earlier or change it to something else, depending. But luckily, we're not as hard-pressed on the divination as it seems. The archaic glyphs and just Daisy's natural ability will probably get us there pretty handily. And then we have our Drawn to the Flame, the Steady-Handed, Practice Makes Perfect, Call the Beyond, our Perceptions, and our Enraptureds. Again, adjust as needed, but this is kind of like a rough upgrade order, depending on how things play out. And that's the deck. Again, this one is very simple. I cooked up a version of one of my favorite rogue decks for skids for the next video, so that's going to be really fun. There's a link down in the video description to the Arkham DB for both the level 0 and the upgraded version of this deck, so check it out if you want to, follow along or save those decks to your own accounts. And as mentioned, in this series, we are... I'm focusing on trying to build decks for investigators in a style I've never built in that investigator before, or an archetype I've never built for that investigator before. So Skids is up next in 2 weeks, and it's one of my favorite rogue archetypes, and I'm excited to share that deck with all of you for the first time. I think as an official deck on this channel. Maybe because it's a Winifred deck that I'm adapting into a Skids deck, and I think it's pretty sick. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. I feel like I just zoomed right through this, but like I said, everything was pretty simple and pretty basic. Huge thank you to all of our patrons. We'll see you in 2 weeks for the next one of these, where we're going to be talking about our good boy Skids O'Toole. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one, and as always, a GG's.